All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back for chapter 13 in the text. You may notice that my form might look a little bit different from the last time. I had a catastrophic failure in my hard drive that I used to store all this information. So basically, I had to go back through and rebuild all of this from scratch. The good news is I have another backup of this one, hopefully. So I'm going to try to back up my items in more than one place now, and hopefully I'll be able to recover some of the information from that hard drive. But that aside, we're in chapter 13, and we're going to be looking at how we can use, improve this customer form. If you remember from the last chapter, we had this customer form, which is going to list all the customers that we have saved to a file. And then we can also add a customer with this form element here. But what we're going to do with this now is we're just really going to kind of change some things around, not even so much yet on the form, but we're going to change it in the customer class. So what we're working on is we're going to be working on doing some indexing and some argument throwing, or exception throwing, sorry, and then just a few other things that we want to kind of take a look at as we move forward. So instead of going to any of the forms, we're going to go straight to the customer class now, which is going to look like this. And I have a new zoom mode, which should make that a little bit easier for you to read. And this is this way that I had it set up from last week. All we have is the private properties, some public properties to get that information, and then we have a couple of constructors, a default one, which is going to set some default information, and we have a constructor that accepts first name, last name, and email, and assigns those values appropriately. And then we have this get display text, which literally just displays the first name, last name, and email address. Let me go ahead and change this up so it's on multiple lines. That way we can read it all. And same thing here. Sorry, I am using a new screen for these this week also, so hopefully things will look a little bit nicer, and hopefully I don't have as many points where I forget to switch from scene to scene. So anyways, this is just our basic class, and what it says is to open up this class and note how the constructors for this class set the properties to the appropriate parameters. Then we want to add code to the set accessors for the first name, last name, and email properties that throw an exception if the value is longer than 30 characters. So there's a couple of different ways that I can do this, and the first thing I'm going to do actually is just create a constant integer that I'm just going to call max length, and we're going to assign it a value of 30, and that way I can use the max length for anything. And actually I'm going to do something a little bit different than what the text asks for, and I'm going to create a couple of them because the max length of 30 for an email is really quite short. Well, let me mute my watch real quick. Okay, sorry about that. So what we're going to do, and this kind of confused me for a little bit at first, the way that the author has this written here, because he says to add the code to the set accessors for the first name, last name, and email properties. And the reason why that confuses me is because an accessor in almost every other programming languages is known as the getter. So the get is the accessor, and the set property here, the set, is called the mutator. So really what we should be doing is adding the code to the set mutator for the first name, last name, and email properties that will throw an exception if the value is longer than 30 characters. So we have our first name. I'm just going to go ahead and add this code real quick here. We just want to kind of get this all set up nice and pretty. And then we're going to say if the value length is greater than the max name length, we're going to throw a new argument exception and say something like, we can say first name too long. Let's say first name maximum is max name length characters. That way we tell the user the first name has a maximum length of 30 characters. Because remember, this max name length is going to be replaced with the value of max name length. If the value is 30 characters or under, then we're fine, and we're just going to set the first name, assign it the name of value. So because we're throwing an exception here, just kind of a neat little thing is whenever we go to actually create this object or change the name of the object, if it throws an argument exception, it will actually not create the object, it will just display the message. So that's just one way that we can stop our programs from creating information that's not valid. And we're going to go ahead, I'm just going to copy this from here. And I'm going to go ahead and copy the entire thing. And we're going to, just going to hit enter, and then I'm going to replace all of that, and then just make sure I change this to last name, cannot type. Okay. So, so we still have our getter, which returns the last name, and then the setter, which is if the value's length is greater than 30 characters. We want to change this to last name maximum. And then again, we're going to do the exact same thing for the setter for the email, except we want to change this to max email length. This email is value. Email maximum is max email length characters. So I think this should all be set up now that the max email length is 50, and the reason for that is because 30 is really short for emails, so I want to try and make this as realistic as possible. Normally your email lengths would probably length restrictions would be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 75 to 100, honestly, but we're going to stick with 50. I think that's probably fine. I think everything looks good, so let's go ahead and let's run this application real quick. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to try to enter a name that is greater than the maximum available length of at least one of the elements. So let me go ahead and run this, and I'm just going to do it for the name, first name, I guess. We'll just come up with some kind of 30-something character first name. So we're going to add, and this is not going to work yet, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. So we're going to say Gregory is the best name ever. Don't you know? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Yeah, okay, so we got it. And then we'll do a last name is Morris, and the email address is my email address. So I'm going to go ahead and try and save this. Now, it does crash now, and this is what I said, it's not going to work yet. I would actually like you to take a quick moment to go ahead and pause this video and just kind of think if you can see why this is not working. So go ahead and pause the video and just, or if you need the second, just kind of think why this isn't working. Why is this program crashing the way that I have it written right now? And once you have the answer, you can come back, or if you just can't think of the answer, then that's fine. We'll just go on from there. All right, if you've had your chance to answer, the reason why this is crashing is because we're throwing this exception, but we're not catching it anywhere. So in the button Save, click, we have the isValid data. The isValid data, what that basically does is it runs it through the validator. It makes sure to see that something is present, something is the first name, last name, and email are present, and then the email is a valid, quote-unquote, valid email. If all that works, then it's just going to come back and say, yes, that's true. If not, it's going to show us an error. And we can demonstrate that pretty easily by just running the program here. Let me see if I can switch to center zoom. And if I run this and I just try to save it here, I get my message box that tells me that everything is not working properly. I don't have the required information. Okay. So all that is still working properly. It doesn't make the program crash, but in the button save, what I probably need to do is say if the data is valid, then I want to try to go ahead and try and create that customer, and then catch, and I have an argument exception I'm going to call EX, and I'm going to do a message box show, and we're just going to do this really easy for now. We're just going to do the message. We'll give it a caught exception. Okay, I'm not going to worry about all the other stuff. And while we're at it, we'll go ahead and we will catch the general exceptions as well. I'm not specifically throwing any of those, but just in case. And then, of course, we'll do the, let me go ahead and scroll this down just a little bit. That's box show. And for the unknown, I like to use the full and say unknown exception. Okay, and then I'm going to actually move the this.close up into the try block because I don't want to necessarily close the form every time I try to save it. If I get an exception, I really only want to do that if I have a valid customer. If I have an invalid customer, it's going to skip over the this.close, going to go to the exceptions, going to show me the message, and then I'll be able to save it again. So let's go ahead and give that one more try. Okay, so we're going to add, again, we'll just try the nothing. Oops, we'll say we have that, okay. And then we're going to come up with the Gregory is the best name out there. Don't you know? Morris. And MORIGT at okstate.edu. Okay, so now whenever we try to save it, this should throw an exception because it can't create this first name or a customer with this first name. So let's go ahead and try to save it. And I get a first name maximum is 30 characters. It did not create the customer, so if I try to exit out of this, I don't have that customer. So I can go ahead in here and try to add it again, and we'll just say Gregory is the best first name ever, Morris. And we'll say best name at okstate.edu. And that should be under 30 characters. So now I have Gregory is the best name ever, Morris. Best name at okstate.edu, and that's all ready to go. And then I can go ahead and I can also delete that. Yes, I want to go ahead and delete. And if I try to add a, we'll do something similar, Gregory, and we'll just go and throw a good number of R's in there. Email is, of course, my email. And whenever I try to say this, last name has 30 characters. And of course, I have 50 characters for this one. I need to make sure I have enough there. I try to save it. Email maximum is 50 characters. So that's all how we're going to handle the exceptions here. But the assignment here does ask for us to get back to, let's go back to that one. The form, the assignment here does ask us to actually go into the form and make another change. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here to the add customers, and then we're going to actually add a max length to each of these elements here. So we're actually going to put 30 as a max length there. And oops, more. And this is going to be 30 for the max length there, and then we will do 50 for the max length on the email. And now what we can do is we can actually force our users, whenever they try to add a a person whose length is too long. So we'll come back up here and we'll add, let me try and just start typing out. Greg, fingers in the wrong spot, is the best first name ever. And once I get to 30 characters, it stops. And what that does is it stops me from actually being able to enter an invalid thing. So this is just a different way that we can actually handle just a different way that we can handle okay, 3 more. Just a different way that we can handle so we don't even get those exceptions. It's just that way we can just say, hey, we're not going to get any exceptions. However, usually for good programming practices, it is best to try to catch your possible exceptions in code, and also that's interesting, in the design, if at all possible. And the reason for that is because we may be using this class in another program, and if if another programmer uses your classes, they may not necessarily know that they have to set the max length to a certain amount. So that's why you set your max length properties within the class with this ability to throw an exception without even having to necessarily worry about it, because the class will take care of the exception itself, and as long as the other programmer is there to catch the exceptions, then everything should be good to go. Now it's going to ask us to add a customer list class to the project, and then kind of rebuild everything using the class instead of a list. So what we want to do is we're going to add a new class. So we right click up there and we come down to add, and then down here towards the bottom is the class. And we're going to title this customer list. Give it a second to kind of come up. Okay, customer list. Okay, so now what it asks for is we're going to have a private variable within this class. That's going to be private list of customers that we'll just call customers, and we'll assign an initial value of null. Okay. Now we're going to have a blank constructor that's just going to set some default values. So public customer list. And we have our default constructor. We're on a roll. All right. Now we're also going to have, so the text likes to do things a little bit differently than I like to. So I'm actually going to come up and I'm going to create a private int, not indexer, int, that is underscore count. And then we're going to have a public count, a public int count with a wrong button, with a get return this dot count, and of course the setter is this dot count is the value. Okay, let me go ahead and scroll this a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and change my zoom so it's a little bit easier for you guys to read. All right, so I have my count now, and that's going to return the number of elements in the list. And really and truly, we probably don't even want a setter on that. So we're going to go ahead and remove the setter. And what we really want to do is we want to return customers.count. So because customer list uses a list inside of it, that's the value that we're going to return. However, customer list is not actually a list object. So by default, it will not have a count property with it. So actually I can go ahead and undo that. We don't need it. So now we have our list. That's going to be a private list. We have our constructor, and then we have a count that's just going to return the count of customers. Okay. Let's see. See, we have an index that we need to create, which provides access to the customer at the specified index. Let me go ahead and get that to the right place in the text for that, as this is not something that I use very often. So what we want to do is we're going to create another property here. It's going to be public, and we're going to be returning a product. Oh, it's not a product, it's a customer. This at int I, and we're going to create a getter and a setter for this, which is get return customers at the index of I, and a setter is customers at the index of I is assigned value. And if we really wanted to, mostly because I like to do it, we can use the this here. So basically, if we this allows us to access the customer list item or object that we're going to be creating at a specific index. So it works just like any other list or array that we have used so far this term. So that's kind of one thing that we have to do to make sure we get that set up. And then we're going to create two more methods here. Nope, we're going to create 4 more methods. We're going to create a public, I believe there's going to be a void called add that accepts a customer that we'll call C. Scroll down a bit. Public void remove customer C. And then we're going to have a public void fill and a public void save. Okay, so that should be all of the methods that we need to add to this. So now we just need to fill in these methods. So really what I'm going to do is I'm really kind of going to borrow code from the other places in my program that I've already done stuff like this. So for instance, I think everything is in the, let's see, that's going to be in the form customer.cs, I believe, is where we're going to add. So the way that we add a customer is to grab the element from the form and then take that information, and instead of doing the customer C, so what we want to do is we want to kind of copy all of this information here, and we're going to come back over here to our customer list, and we're really just going to kind of paste it in here. So if the customer that gets passed in is null or is not null, then we're going to add it to our list. And then instead of fill customer list, we're actually just going to say this dot fill. So all that should be set up now. Another thing that we can do, because we're going to be changing up save, is we're going to say this dot save customers. And we're not going to pass that. So again, we're just going to add the customer if it's not null. And then we're going to save it. Since we're going to actually be using the private property here in the save method, we don't have to pass it. And then the fill method is also going to use the information from the file. So that actually replaces, come back to form customer CS. That's actually going to replace this here. First thing we need to do is we need to add the customer list object and actually replace this. So we're actually going to create a private customer list called customers. And then we're going to remove this code here. And then we're going to say customers add C. And that's going to add our customer. Again, we have some exceptions that can get thrown by this. So if we don't actually have a valid customer coming back, it's not going to add anything. If we have a null customer coming back, we have the check in place here where it's not going to add a null customer. So there we go. All right, the next thing that we can look at is remove, which we're also going to borrow some of the code from. And I'm just trying to see if how, okay. So we're just going to kind of copy this information here, and we're going to come back this way to the customer list and kind of paste that in the remove. So we're going to remove that customer, and then again we're just going to probably remove those lines entirely and say this dot save, this dot fill, and we're going to do all of our error checking and everything else here. So if the result is yes, then we're just going to say customers. Nope, actually already have that line there, so I'm just going to remove those lines because this remove, is it remove over here? Yes, it's remove. This remove here does all the other things. It's going to save our file and it's going to reload the list. So again, we're just kind of moving step by step through it. The fill is going to fill the list with customer data from the file. So we need to find where we fill that. I believe we had a fill customer list method. And basically we're going to get the customer list, and we can't actually use the for each here. We have to use a for loop. We can do for int I is 0, I is less than customers count, because remember we have that count property now, I plus plus. And then we'll say list customers items add C dot customers at I dot get display text. We can remove that right there. So again, we're just going to, this is just taking the information from the customer list and is going to present it there. The fill is, let's see what it fills, the list with customer data from the file. Okay, so let me see, that is from the, so what we're actually going to do here is in the fill, we're just going to say customer DB, get customers, and we're going to assign our customers, oops, that, not what I wanted, customers is assigned that value, and then of course the set is going to be customer DB dot save customers, passing in the customers. And again, we'll add this. So this customer, or this fill and save, this is how we're actually going to get our information. This is how we're actually going to get the customers from the file, and then save is how we're going to write it to the file. So whenever we come back to our form customers here, what we want to do is we want to customers is equal to, so what I need to do is say customers is equal to new customer list. Start creating a new customer list there. And then we can fill it, and then we can fill the list. Okay, so we actually did get the information from that file because we have Sally Golightly and Gregory Morrison here. Now let's try to add somebody. We will go ahead and we will add John Smith, and he will be Smith JP add OKState.edu. Okay, now did not add it to the list here, so let me just see if I can remove one from the list. Okay, did not remove it from the list. So now we need to try and figure out why that happened. First, let me go ahead and rerun it. Okay, so it did actually remove it, and it did actually add it, but it didn't regenerate. So what I need to do, I know what I need to do, is I need to go ahead and say fill customer list whenever I delete and when I add. Because the fill method, whenever we use the fill method, that only fills the list. This one actually fills the list box object. So now whenever I come in here and I'm going to go ahead and add Sally Golightly back. Oops. My focus is in the wrong place. Sally Golightly. And she will be, when I have GOLIGHS at OKState.edu. And we will save that. And there we go. Sally Golightly is there. And if I delete John Smith, say yes, he now is gone. So all of that seems to be working the way that it should be now. So you might be wondering why we would do stuff like this. And it's really just to separate out some of the functionality from different things. So the customer itself, the customer class, really should just be about getting the customer information and storing that information. It really should not be about manipulation or anything like that. It shouldn't be for adding information to a database or a file or anything like that. It really is just holding the information for us to use in the program. Whereas the customer list class holds information regarding our list of classes, and this could have a little bit more. Part of that information is going to be saving it to a file and stuff like that. So that's where our customer DB class here comes in. And then whenever we come back to our, let me remove customer DB class and let me remove validator. We don't need those anymore. And so when we look at our form customers, let me go ahead and go to the code on this. So when we go to this, we're just telling it to add the information and then filling the list. Whenever we add the information, it's updating the file. But we no longer are connecting directly to the database from here, which is kind of what we would want. Because normally if we're writing a program like this, let's just say, the way that we would write a program, the way that we would write these classes is I don't want someone that's doing the front end side of things, the design side of things, to necessarily be able to access information on the database. I want them to be able to, and this is assuming that we had a database, I just want them to create a layout and then create some basic items. So if we look here, the form customers just initializes a component. Fill customer list literally just takes a list of customers and it uses this get display text method of each customer to generate the items in the list. The add button just calls up a new form and shows the new form, gets the information from that form, and then adds it to a list and then fills the customer list. Same thing with delete. It just gets the selected index. It creates a customer object from that. Ask, are you sure you want to delete it? Which is all part of the form display. And then if the user says yes, then it just says, okay, remove that. And it removes it from the list. And then it redisplays the list. Button exit just exits, and the form load just loads the form and loads the customer object, the customer list object. So everything here has to do with really the design of the form itself and not really to do with interaction with what we would call the back end, the database or the file side of things. So when we use our customer DB class, we're using that from the customer list. The end user, the designer, is probably going to have, they're only going to have the ability to see what we want them to see. They can add, they can remove, they can fill, they can save. if we're working with a team, this is all that we give them. We don't give them how they're added, how they're removed, anything like that. We just know you need to add a customer and you need to remove a customer. And then same thing with the indexing and the counts. We just want the user to be able to have that information. They don't need to know how we got it. And then of course the customer DB class, I've already closed it down, so I'm not going to reopen it. That just allows us to access the actual file that we're saving this stuff in. So that's kind of how a program starts to work, and we're really starting to kind of get into building modular programs that can be used across the way. So like this customer class, we could combine this with another application that maybe doesn't need the customer length or the customer list, and then we still have a customer. And everything would still work just fine by itself. It's not reliant upon that customer list. Now the customer list is reliant upon the customer class, but that's because we built this class specifically for this application to use this customer class. We also have the customer DB, which gets information from a file or gets information from a database and presents it to this list. We could have another customer DB type class that actually connects to a database instead of connecting to a file, which is what we're using right now. And then we would just have like a customer maybe file.cs and a customer db.cs. And that way we have different ways of being able to access data depending on what we need. But the customer file and the customer DB are going to present the same information. It's just how they get it. But the person using customer list, they don't care how that information is gotten. They just need to know that the information is there. They're still going to have the get customers and a save customers method involved in all of that. However that works on the database or the file side is completely up to the files that we've created. So this is how we're starting to build modular programs. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into 13.2. It's a pretty short section, and I don't really want to create like a 5-minute video for this. So we're just going to showcase how to do overloaded operations, and then that'll be pretty much it. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So what we're looking at now is this concept called overloading. And what overloading does is it basically takes a method that's already defined and it allows us to redefine it in a way that we want to use it for our program. So for instance, we're going to be overloading the plus and the minus. So what we really want to do with this is we want to go ahead and we're going to start by overloading where it's a public static. We're going to return a product, not product, keep looking at the text, customer list object, and we're going to say operator plus. And then this is going to accept a product list, P1, not product list, customer list, customer list, C1, and a customer C. All right, let me go ahead and put this on multiple lines so it's easier to read. Just make sure I'm doing this right. Okay, I'm gonna get space there. Okay, and then really all that we really want to do with this is when we use a plus sign, we're just going to say P1 dot add. Wow, that's keep going off the text. C1 add C, and that is pretty much it. Let me just double check the text for this real quick. Oh, and then return P1 or return C1. Return C1. So the way that this would normally be used for something like this is what we would normally do, and what the assignment kind of asks for, is you might combine certain information. So let's say we had a first name, last name in a list of people, and we wanted to combine two people. what we might do is combine their first names together and their last names together, and then maybe, like, say it's a grade of assignments or something like that, we could just add the two assignments together, and that would create a new object that has the properties of both. And I'm not sure how to really demonstrate that here. Maybe I'll do a separate little side video just to kind of showcase how to do another way of doing operator overriding. But for the time being, we're just going to go with this. Let me go and scroll down a little bit, because we're also going to do public static. And the reason why we use public static is because this operation does not belong to any specific instance. Oops. Any specific instance of the customer list. It belongs to the customer list class as a whole. And it's not operation, it's operator. There we go. Yep. And then same thing, we're just going to C1 remove. And when we're doing this, because we're passing in a customer list object and not a list of customers, this is actually going to call the add and remove methods from here. And I'll go ahead and I will put minus below the remove just for consistency. Doesn't matter, but it's only for consistency. So it's still going to call this remove, so it's still going to save, and it's still going to fill. And then it's going to return this new customer list object. So now we're going to have to assign the customer list to this this new list that we're creating. So let's go back to the customers forms, and when we add the new list, and this is purely kind of purely however you want to do it, but we're going to say customers is assigned the value of customers. Customers assign the value of customers plus C. And that's going to actually add our customer. And the same thing down here, we're going to say customers is assigned the value of customers minus C. And we're going to see that this is all going to work the exact same way, because it's doing all the same things. It's just doing it with plus signs and minus signs instead of doing add and subtract or add and remove methods. Readjust my C real quick. Okay, so let me get this on the right screen first, and then we want to go to center zoom like that. So if I go ahead and I add, we'll go back and we'll add Jon Snow this time, for those of you that may have ever watched Game of Thrones. Then we're going to save Jon Snow. Jon Snow is now here. So we added him properly. We are going to delete him properly, and everything is just fine. So that is all basically how that works. Another way that we can do this is we can do the minus equals. Oops, I hit the wrong button. So we can actually do minus equals and plus equals on these. It is really just however you feel most comfortable. It's going to do the exact same thing either way. I'm not going to go ahead and retest it. I don't think we necessarily need to do that. The only other thing that I was going to show you, now I meant to show this last week, but it slipped my mind. But if you come into your File Explorer now, and I'll go ahead and I'll just make that full screen, and we will go to that zoom. These are all the files that I have. So now I used to have a D drive. Now I have a T drive on C#. So if you look at this, we now have, and if you go back to our Visual Studio, this one here, and if we go to the customer DB file, I have this T:\C#/files directory that I'm using. And if you look at my thing here, I'll go and zoom it in some. I have customer maintenance, which is the zip, the folder for this particular thing, and then I have this files directory here. This directory was created by my by the program. And whenever I come in here, I now have a customer's text, and I can edit this with Notepad because that's what I usually use. And we now have Gregory Morris, Morigt at OK State, Sally Golightly, Lies at OK State, and these things are now set up and they're separated by the pipes, which is how we had this programmed in the customer DB file. And if I come back in here, let me go ahead and, oops, wrong one. And let me go ahead and rerun the project. Get it on the right screen. If I go ahead and I add to this file, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to put John Snow back in here. And save him. Ta-da, he's there. I'm going to go ahead and exit that. Whenever I go back to Notepad here, I use Notepad++, it says the file has been modified by another program. Do I want to reload it? Whenever I go to reload it, I now have John Snow in my file. So this is actively writing to this file as I work with it. So it's just kind of something neat. I did mean to show you that last week whenever I was, how do you like my background? Whenever I was going through this all. So it's all working. Everything is as expected. So that is pretty much it for this week. The text goes through and it goes into 13-3 is delegates and events. If anybody really wants me to do a video on delegates and events, I will. It's not something that I'm overly familiar with. It's not something that I have ever used in my own personal programming. But I can try to cover it if you want me to. But for the time being, I'm just going to kind of cut this video off here. It has been going on a lot longer than I like, but this will be the only video for the week, unless I do another one on operator overloading, but that's just kind of, that'll just be a little probably 15-20 minute video just showing that. But that's all I'm going to cover for this week is 13.1 and 13.2. You're more than welcome to try out 13.3. I'm never going to ask for the use of delegates or these event handlers the way that they have them in here. That's not going to be on any of your assignments in this class or the next. So all that said, I wish you all the best of luck and have a great week.